All right, week 9 of the 2023 college football season is officially in the books. Today's Monday, and you know what that means? It's time to update the Uncle Lou Top 25 ranking. Let's get right to it. Here it is. I've got some changes in the top 5. I've got some changes in the top 10. Oklahoma, of course, lost, and I've done some rearranging in my top 4 or 5. As usual, I'm going to go through this list from 1 to 25. I'll do the best I can to try to explain my reasoning, why I have certain teams ranked where I do. I don't expect everybody to agree with me. That's not the point. I just, the complaint you hear about the AP poll, the coaches poll, whatever poll is that, you don't know why somebody would rank this team there or whatever. So again, you might not agree, but I at least try to give you my thought process of why I have certain teams, where I do. The first playoff ranking comes out tomorrow, Tuesday. I think 7 o'clock, 7 or 8 o'clock, something like that on ESPN. They do their whole spiel or whatever where they release the first playoff rankings. So I'll probably live stream during that tomorrow. I've done that in the past. So if you're going to be watching that first playoff ranking reveal, make sure you tune in. We'll watch it and react live together tomorrow, 7 o'clock. I think that is on ESPN. And don't freak out when you see the first playoff rankings either. Yeah, does anybody remember who was ranked number 1 in the first playoff ranking last year? Anyone remember? That's right. Tennessee was ranked number 1 for 1 week in November last year. So the first playoff ranking is not necessarily an indication of where we're headed in terms of college football playoffs. So keep that in mind. But anyway, I'm going to go 1 through 25. Like I said, I'll do my best to try to explain my reasoning on some of this. Okay. I have moved Michigan from 1 to 5. Why? Well, they cheated. I don't need to see any more evidence. Whatever. Look, some of the Michigan fans are still hiding behind technicalities in the rule or whatever it is. I don't really care. I'm just going to be honest with you. Again, you don't have to agree with me. I don't really care whether Michigan technically broke a rule. They intended to cheat the system. They did everything they could to do it. They tried to hide it. They moved money around. They did all different kinds of things. And I'm just convinced of it. And I don't think anything's going to change my mind, but I'm open to it. Now, I don't have a say-so in the playoff rankings. You don't have to worry about where I have anybody ranked. But for right now, I have moved Michigan back from 1 to 5. I don't think, again, what I think doesn't matter. I don't think Michigan should be allowed to participate in the postseason. That's what it. And I know what's coming for the Michigan fans. They're going to say, "Well, you're just scared to play Michigan." No one is scared to play Michigan. Least of all Georgia. Georgia's not scared to play anybody. So it's just ridiculous. But in my mind, they cheated. The NCAA, if they do anything at all, it won't be till 2 or 3 years down the road. The Big Ten could step in and deem Michigan ineligible for the postseason. I think the Big Ten should do that. I don't think the Big Ten will. I think Michigan will. When the playoff rankings come out tomorrow, I don't think the playoff committee is going to take these cheating allegations into account at all. So you don't have to worry about what I think, where I have them ranked. I think the playoff committee is going to put them wherever they think they deserve to be, and I think if Michigan goes undefeated and wins the Big Ten, they're getting in the playoffs. Just me personally, I'm moving them back to 5 for right now. So all I did was bump the other teams up. So I had Ohio State at 2. I bumped them up to 1. I had Florida State at 3, bumped them up to 2. Had Georgia at 4, bumped them up to 3. Had Washington at 5, bumped them up to 4. Talk a little bit about these top 4 teams. So I've got Ohio State at 1. I think Ohio State's got 3 good wins, 2 of which are probably really good. The win on the road at Notre Dame, that might not impress everybody. You say, well, Notre Dame's got 2 losses, whatever. Look, I'm not saying Notre Dame's an elite team, maybe not a playoff caliber team, but winning on the road early in the season with a first-year starting QB like Ohio State did, to me, is impressive. I think the win over Penn State is impressive. Again, Penn State's been a disappointment to me, but that's because I thought Penn State was a potential playoff team. They're clearly not, but they're still a top 10, top 15 type of team. I doubt they're going to lose to anybody the rest of the way other than Michigan, so they're going to go 10-2 and probably finish in the top 10 again. Ohio State beat them. And then this past weekend, winning on the road at Wisconsin. Wisconsin's not a great team. First-year head coach Luke Fickell. But they're a decent team. They're borderline top 25. That was only Wisconsin's, second loss or something like that. They may lose 1 or 2 more, but they seem like about an 8 to 9 win team. I think that's a decent win. So they got 3, pretty good wins, 2 of which I think are really good. And when you're looking at resume, I don't know if there's a team in the country right now that has a better resume than Ohio State. Now, if you want to go on eye test, Michigan has looked like one of the best teams. Georgia has looked like one of the best teams at times. Florida State has looked like one of the best teams at times. Washington has looked like one of the best teams at times. Ohio State. There's a long list of teams you can make an argument for number one when it comes to eye test, right? Most teams have had a couple of weeks where maybe they didn't look great. Michigan probably being the exception, although they've had the weakest schedule of any team in the top five. Now, that's, it's not Michigan's fault that the Big Ten teams they've played aren't any good or whatever. All you can do is play the teams that are on your schedule, and if you play a bad team, you need to blow them out, and that's what Michigan has done. So I'm not saying Michigan has done anything wrong, but it is what it is. They do have the weakest schedule of any team in the top five. Florida State at 2. I think they have one really good win, that being the opening weekend against LSU. The win on the road at Clemson, there are some Florida State fans still running around holding that win up as a good win. That's not a good win at all. In fact, it's a bad win. Clemson's a bad team. They're a terrible team. And they took you to overtime. You were lucky to win that game, to be honest. They missed a field goal at the end. So that was not a good win. The LSU win was a good win. And then there's the Boston College game for Florida State, which is, kind of a check mark in the negative column for them as well. But I've got them at 2. They're undefeated. They're the favorite to win the ACC. They most likely are going to win the ACC. Probably going to play Louisville there. And, I feel like 2 is a pretty good spot for them. I've got Georgia at 3. You can obviously make a case for Georgia at 1. 2-time defending national champions. However, my rankings don't take previous years into account. They just don't. I had Georgia ranked number 1 to start the season, but they struggled out of the gate. Georgia didn't look dominant the first month or so of the season. That's just reality. At one point, I had them all the way down at 7 or 8, I think. Since that time, they've had a couple of better wins. They blew out Kentucky. They absolutely destroyed Florida this past weekend, and they've got a tough stretch coming up here. Georgia's next 3 opponents are all ranked within the top 20. 2 of them are ranked within the top 15. They play Missouri this coming week, a top 15 team. They play Ole Miss the following week, a top 15 team, and Tennessee after that, a top 20 team. So 3 tough games in a row coming up for Georgia. We'll see if they can get through there undefeated, but I've got them at number 3 right now. At Washington, I've got 4. They have not looked good the last couple of weeks. Through the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season, they looked like maybe they would deserve a number 1 ranking. They had beat everyone they played handily. They had a good win against Oregon. But since that win against Oregon, they just have not looked the same. They've struggled each of the last 2 weeks against pretty bad teams, but they won. And that sometimes is the difference between a good team and a really great team. A really great team can beat teams when they don't play well. And Washington has not played well the last 2 weeks, but they still found a way to win. Georgia has done that a couple of times this year. Florida State did it against Boston College and Clemson. So that can be the mark of a great team. A great team can play pretty bad and still find ways to win. That's what Washington's doing. They've got a couple of tough games left down the stretch and then a probable rematch with Oregon in the Pac-12 title game. Michigan at 5, talked about them already, undefeated, blown out every single team they played. Based strictly on the eye test, you can make an argument for them to be number 1. And in fact, I've had Michigan number 1 for about 4 or 5 weeks in a row in my ranking. I already talked about why I moved them to 5. At 6, I've got Oregon. I feel like they're probably the best one-loss team. They should probably be undefeated. I feel like they played well enough to beat Washington, and I think some poor coaching decisions at key points in that game cost Oregon, and they lost a close one. They're going to get a chance to play that one again, I feel like, in the Pac-12 title game, and I'm going to be honest with you. If Oregon and Washington were playing again tomorrow, I'd pick Oregon to win the rematch. I think Oregon is in pretty good shape to potentially make a college football playoff, sitting right there at number 6. I moved them up 2 spots from last week. I had them at number 8. Oregon absolutely destroyed Utah this past weekend. Oklahoma, I only dropped them 1 spot. I moved them down to 7, and I'm going to be honest, I had a really hard time with this here. So last week I had Oklahoma at 6 and Texas at 7. Oklahoma was undefeated. Texas' only loss was to Oklahoma, and it was a close game, so I had Texas just 1 spot behind OU. They were at 6 and 7. Well, this week, Oklahoma comes out and, of course, loses in the last minute of the game to Kansas, and Texas beats BYU with a backup quarterback. Quinn Ewers was out. Malik Murphy played. I didn't think he looked great. So I struggled here because it's a bad loss for Oklahoma losing to Kansas. But how far can you drop them? With Texas sitting there at 8 and Oklahoma having beat Texas, they now have the same record. They're 7-1. Both Oklahoma and Texas now are 7-1. I just couldn't justify putting Texas ahead of OU, even though OU just lost a bad game. So I left OU at 7, and or I dropped OU to 7, and I dropped Texas to 8. It's not a punishment for anything Texas did. I think 35-6 over BYU with Malik Murphy making his first start is a good enough win. It's a combination of Oregon's domination over Utah, so I felt like I had to move them up, and Oklahoma lost. Well, I'm basically what I'm doing is admitting to you that I'm having a hard time ranking OU and Texas, and then right behind them I've got Bama, and it's the same type of thing. Bama's got one loss. They're a pretty good team, but they lost to Texas. So I decided to just put these 3 teams in a row here. Oklahoma, 7. They beat Texas, so I've got Texas 8. Texas beat Bama, so I've got Bama 9. To me, that just makes the most sense. The thing that's throwing me off is Oklahoma has by far a worse loss than either of those two. Oklahoma's loss to Kansas is not a good loss at all. Texas losing to OU, decent loss. Bama losing to Texas, decent loss. But OU beat Texas and Texas beat Bama. So there's just arguments to be made. You could probably flip this around and have it Bama, Texas, OU. But anyway, this is how I have it. Oklahoma and Texas both have tough games coming up this week. Oklahoma's on the road at Oklahoma State, a red-hot Oklahoma State. And Texas hosts Kansas State. And Kansas State, over the last couple of weeks, looks like they might be the best team in the Big 12. Oklahoma and Texas have played bad 2 weeks in a row, really. Very interesting weekend in the Big 12 coming up. I would not at all be surprised if Oklahoma and Texas both lost this weekend. And I would say that there's over a 50% chance that at least one of them lose. Those are going to be 2 really good games. Oklahoma at Oklahoma State in the Bedlam game. The last year we're going to see that game, by the way, for a while. With Oklahoma joining the SEC, Oklahoma State's got their feelings hurt, and the 2 schools just can't get together and work anything out to keep that rivalry going. So it looks like this game is going away. This is the last year. Oklahoma State would love nothing more than to beat Oklahoma in the last year of this series. Oklahoma's last year in the Big 12. It would be a terminal loss for Oklahoma. It would knock them out of playoff contention, and it would likely knock Oklahoma out of the Big 12 title game. Texas, same thing. They got to host Kansas State, and Kansas State's red hot. Kansas State could 100% go into Austin and win this game, especially Texas being without Quinn Ewers. 2 really big games in the Big 12. Oklahoma 7, Texas 8, Bama 9. Bama hosts LSU this week. So, again, if you think Bama should be higher, or if you think I've got Bama too high, it almost doesn't matter because they play a top 15 LSU team at home this week. So if they beat LSU, then they definitely deserve this top 10 ranking. If they lose to LSU, then they're going to be moved out next week anyway. So it almost doesn't even matter where they're at here, but I've got them at 9. Penn State, I've got at 10. I am just so disappointed in Penn State. They're still a good team. They're probably going to go 10-2 like like they did last year with losses to Ohio State and Michigan. It just feels like they can't get over that hump, and that's got to be disappointing for the Penn State fans. I wasn't impressed with their win this past week at home against a bad Indiana team. They were favored by like 32, Penn State was, and I think they won by about 10 points. It just another unimpressive performance from Penn State. But, they only have 1 loss. They're probably only going to lose 2. How far down do you really want to move them? I've got them at 10. Ole Miss I've got at 11. That's up a couple of spots from last week. They have a big game next week in Athens against Georgia. This week they play Texas A&M. Got them at 11. LSU at 12. I talked about them already. Moved them up a few spots from 16. That was more or less a result of North Carolina losing again, who I had at 14, so I had to drop them down. Oregon State I had ahead of them last week. They lost, had to drop them down. So LSU kind of moved up by default this week up to number 12. And again, they play on the road at Bama this week. So if you think that's too high, great. They'll lose to Bama and fall back down. If you think that's not high enough, great. They'll beat Bama and they'll be in the top 10 next week. So, but there you go. I've got LSU at 12. Louisville, I've got at 13. Moved them up a few spots from 18. Again, kind of a result of some teams ahead of them losing. They still only have one loss and appear to be on a collision course with Florida State for the ACC championship game with a month to go in the regular season. Notre Dame, I've got them at 14. They destroyed Pitt this past week, so I moved Notre Dame up one spot from 15 to 14. I think it was the worst beating Pitt's taken in about 50 years. They play on the road at a reeling Clemson team this coming weekend. Feels like Clemson's in desperate need of a win. I don't know if they're going to get it. Notre Dame appears to be a better team than Clemson. Clemson really struggling. But, Notre Dame at Clemson this coming week. Missouri, I've got at 15. Again, a team with just one loss, and that was kind of like a track meet back and forth game with LSU a few weeks ago. They've got a decent win at home over Kansas State, and they play on the road in Athens this week, a big game in the SEC East, first place on the line in that one. Oregon State, I dropped them all the way down to 16. They lost again to Arizona this time, 27-24. Close loss to an okay Arizona team, not a great team, but better than they have been the last few years. Still a disappointing loss for Oregon State. That's their second loss, dropping them down to 16. Utah dropped them down to 17. I had them at 12, so they dropped 5 spots. They just ran into a buzzsaw this week against Oregon. Utah's kind of been floating along with defense and not much offense, and it just caught up with him this week. No Cam Rising. He's out for the season, of course. He's going to take a medical red shirt, let the knee get better and all that, and they've just had a hard time getting anything going offensively. And like I said, it caught up with them this week. Oregon just dominated that game from start to finish. This game was over midway through the second quarter. Utah at 17. They host Arizona State this coming week. UCLA, I've got it 18. They beat Colorado this past weekend, 28-16. I think the score of that one was. They're on the road at Arizona coming up this week, so that'll be a good game. But Chip Kelly and the UCLA Bruins, I've got it 18. Air Force undefeated after another win, this time over Colorado State. So I moved them up to 19. I had them at 23 last week. But, look, do I think they're a top 10 team, one of the best teams in the country? No. But they may end up playing in a New Year's Six game. We'll see. It's going to be between them, Tulane. We'll see. But at some point, winning has to matter, right? And Air Force is undefeated. I've got them at 19. Tennessee at 20. They beat Kentucky this past weekend. A pretty good game, actually, 33-27. Tennessee holds on to win. Great day on the ground for Tennessee. They ran for what seemed like 1 million yards, and they did a good job defensively, keeping Ray Davis in check, too, the running back for Kentucky, who ate Florida alive earlier this year. Tennessee's secondary did not play well. Devin Leary he had the game of his life, but Kentucky comes up short. Tennessee gets the win. I've got them at 20. That's up 2 spots from last week. They play UConn this coming week. Good luck to the Vols in that one. Tulane at 21. They still just have the one loss. They beat Rice this past weekend, and they play on the road at East Carolina coming up. Tulane, of course, made the New Year's Six last year, beating Southern Cal in was it the Fiesta Bowl or the Cotton Bowl? Can't remember which one. Kansas State at 22. Oklahoma State at 23. These two teams are both red hot, and they both get a chance this weekend to vault way up the rankings. Kansas State has 2 losses. Oklahoma State, I believe, has 2 losses, but only 1 loss for each of them in the Big 12. There's a 5-way tie for first place in the Big 12 right now. 5 teams have 1 loss. 4 of those 5 teams are playing each other this week. Kansas State on the road at Texas, and Oklahoma State hosting Oklahoma. The 5th team, Iowa State, plays Texas in a couple of weeks. So this is all going to work itself out, but it seemed like a sure thing that we were going to get a Texas-Oklahoma rematch in the Big 12 title game a couple of weeks ago. I'm not so sure about that now. I would not at all be surprised to see Texas and or Oklahoma go down this weekend. We may be looking at a Kansas State-Oklahoma State Big 12 title game. We'll see, but it's going to be a crazy November in the Big 12 and the Pac-12. James Madison, I've got at 24. They're also undefeated. And Kansas gets back into the top 25 at number 25 with their win against Oklahoma this past week. Kansas is 6-2. There you go. That's the Uncle Lou Top 25 for Week 10 of the 2023 college football season. Be sure and let me know down below where you disagree, where you think I got things wrong, and I'll talk to you again real soon. Have a good morning.